Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, January 8th, 2009. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. With this week, Bruce Swiecicki, Senior Technical Advisor for the National Propane Gas Association, joins us to talk about propane and propane accessories. Along with some important safety information, Bruce shares some tips on getting the most out of your propane burner under the brew pot. Well, if you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through both basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And you can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Still plenty of 2009 Brewers logbooks available if you haven't picked yours up already. I've broken mine in with a session beer. Hoppy session beer, thanks to Andy Sparks. Check out the logbook on basicbrewingshop.com, which is the only place you can get it, unfortunately, since they're fairly expensive to make. Not a lot of margin for wholesale to get them out there to the stores. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us. Click on our associate link first on the way to Amazon.com. It won't cost you any extra. And you'll be helping us bring you this show, basically. We appreciate your support, as always. I want to dedicate this whole show to the topic of propane. You may recall I got a letter from Bob in Rochester, New York last week, and Bob asked if it was safe to use propane burners in the garage if you crack the door open a bit. And I asked you guys if there were any propane experts out there listening, and I got a couple of responses. Jerry from Oak Creek, Wisconsin writes, "Please understand that I am not an expert on using propane and or propane accessories, and here's why. I have over the years used 2 propane burners many times during the winter months in my 2-car garage with the doors completely closed. In addition, I routinely use a propane heater in my basement office and a small propane heater in my car over lunch break at work while parked and the windows closed. Apart from the usual abnormalities and deficiencies my wife claims, I've suffered no ill effects as far as I can tell. Maybe that's the effect. I can't tell." Jerry says, "I can only guess as to what your expert on propane and or propane accessories would have to say about this. Anyway, please understand your results may and probably will vary." It'd be interesting to see what you after you hear our expert, Jerry, what you think about that. Then there's this from Jason in Hiram, Utah. Jason says, "Now, I am also no expert in propane or propane accessories. However, I do have experience with using a propane burner in the garage. I frequently have to repair my garage in the middle of winter, and I use a 90,000 BTU propane heater to heat the garage." Jason says, "While using my burner, I keep the garage door open about 4 inches. As a measure of safety, I always use a carbon monoxide/combustible gas monitor. If I hear the alarm go off, which has only happened twice in about 40 hours of work, I open the door all the way and allow the garage to air out until my meter reads 0 once again. So I guess the advice I give is to buy a high-quality carbon monoxide/combustible gas monitor. Hope this helps." Well, thanks again to Jason and Jerry for the input. And the more I thought about this, the more I knew that we really need a bona fide expert in the propane field. So I entered propane safety into Google, and I found the National Propane Gas Association, which represents the industry. And on this, the National Propane Gas Association deserves a lot of credit because I sent them an email the first thing in the morning, and by lunchtime, not only did I have an email response, but I also had an interview set up for early that afternoon. So I've worked on both sides of the media fence professionally, both on the journalist side and the corporate side, and I can tell you that that's an impressive response, and they need a lot of credit for that. So before the interview, I put out a request for questions also on Twitter, and I got a flood of responses from you guys. And as a result, what started off as essentially a soundbite for the show turned into a genuine topic. and an opportunity for me to ceaselessly do my Hank Hill impression. So I appreciate everybody for your help there. So let's hear our conversation with Bruce Swiecicki. Bruce Swiecicki, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
And you are the Senior Technical Advisor for the National Propane Gas Association. So if we wanted an authority on the use of propane in home brewing, I guess you're the guy, huh?
Yes, absolutely. And I would encourage your listeners, if they have any questions at all pertaining to propane, even beyond the use of propane for brewing beer, to contact me as well. And maybe you can provide them with my email address at the end of this interview.
Yeah, I can put your email address on our website in the description of this episode, so that even when people are going through the archives, they can find you in the future.
Sounds great.
The question that originally started this search for a topic was from a homebrewer named Bob from Rochester, New York, and he writes, I have a 35,000 BTU propane burner as a part of my all-grain brewing rig. I've brewed a handful of times now in my two-car garage with the garage door cracked open 1 or 2 feet. It gets cold up in Rochester. Is this adequate enough to allow sufficient circulation of oxygen and to avoid carbon monoxide asphyxiation? Or should I avoid the risk altogether by lifting the garage door wide open and braving the elements while brewing? So what's the official stand of the National Propane Gas Association on that?
Well, the National Propane Gas Association really endorses the requirements that appear in NFPA 58. This is the Liquefied Petroleum Gas Standard. It's published by the National Fire Protection Association in Battery March Park, Massachusetts. And that particular standard is used throughout the United States, and in fact it is probably the most predominantly used standard throughout the world for LP gas, and of which propane is one of them. This standard does not really permit the use of or the storage of a cylinder indoors. And even though the gentleman from Rochester is talking about using a cylinder in a garage, that is still considered to be indoors by the NFPA 58 standard. So I would discourage him from doing that, and instead trying to maybe use a device or a smaller apparatus which has been approved for use indoors. And there are those devices available. Typically they do use a 1-pound propane cylinder, and in a residence you're allowed to store up to 2 of those 1-pound cylinders within a residence. So that would be a legal installation and use of propane.
Now, when you brew, you could be burning propane at full blast with this 35,000 BTU burner for an hour and a half. So I'm not sure how long 1 pound of propane would go.
Well, in that case, you'd be in a little bit of trouble, because 1 pound of propane contains approximately 21,000 BTUs. So you wouldn't be able to quite make it to your hour of use on that. There are other options, however, and one of those might be to go with a larger propane cylinder, but store it outdoors and pipe it or use a copper tube to bring it into the building and make a connection to the appliance. The other consideration as well is with the appliance itself, and making sure that the appliance has been listed and designed for use indoors, because, of course, the burning of a fossil fuel like propane or gasoline or natural gas does produce carbon monoxide, and that would certainly be a consideration in a garage or other indoor setting.
So we have concerns on 2 fronts, essentially. We have the tank itself, and what would be the concern with having a standard size propane tank inside in the first place?
Well, in the United States, the concern really arises from fire safety aspects, and that is, of course, you've got propane, which is a very volatile energy source, and that's the reason it's so valuable to our nation, contained within this cylinder, and it's got a lot of energy contained within it. So if it is subjected to a fire situation, the pressure rises in the container, and it can lead to a release of propane, which, of course, you don't want to have indoors because you're talking about a potentially large fire jet coming out of that cylinder. And so for fire safety reasons, propane cylinders greater than 1 pound are not really permitted to be stored indoors. And that's where the concerns emanate from the fire safety aspects of propane.
And then if you have the device itself that's burning, say you have one of the turkey cookers, or if you have like one of the Cajun style cookers, they may not necessarily be designed for inside use. And is there a concern with carbon monoxide, and is there a concern with, say, unburned fuel being let out into the environment?
Well, are you talking about the indoor environment, or? Yeah.
I mean, if you've got one of these turkey fryers or hurricane burners or Cajun cookers or whatever that we're using for home brewing inside, is it a legitimate concern that you might be asphyxiating yourself or putting yourself in harm's way that way?
I believe that would be a legitimate concern. Those devices are designed and they're tested and listed by agencies such as Underwriters Laboratories and other agencies like that. They're listed for outdoor use. So there really is no evaluation, for example, of the carbon monoxide that would be produced by those devices. And that is a typical test that would be done on any appliances such as, for example, a gas range. You're releasing the products of combustion from a gas range indoors, but those products have been tested and listed, so the production of carbon monoxide is monitored and is ensured to be below a certain level. So when you're talking about turkey fryers and those other devices, typically those are again tested and listed for outdoor use only, not indoors. So you are running the risk of generating carbon monoxide and other products of combustion, which may be detrimental to the health of human beings and animals.
And carbon monoxide is odorless, so it could sneak up on you and you wouldn't even know.
Well, that's correct. Yes, yeah, absolutely. You wouldn't be able to tell it by the odor, and there are symptoms that I believe it's the Environmental Protection Agency lists on their website that indicate that you might be suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning, such as headaches and queasy feeling and dizziness and that sort of thing.
And we're drinking beer at the same time we're brewing, so that might...
So it's hard to discern between the two, maybe.
I solicited questions on Twitter, and one of the questions that I got back was from Rhino777 in Madison, Wisconsin. I don't know his real name. He says, could I use a hood or ventilator with one of those propane burners? If say he ran a tube from the outside and had the tank on the outside of the building, could using a vent hood kind of help with those fears, those concerns?
Well, it sounds like a good idea. The thing of it is, though, is that those appliances, when you're talking about codes and installation according to the codes, the appliances must always be installed in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions, because that's the way they're tested. So what I would recommend is that Rhino go back to the manufacturer of the appliance and run the question past the manufacturer and find out whether or not they could endorse that sort of use of their appliance. It's a pretty creative solution, but in terms of actually being code compliant, he should go back to the manufacturer and get the okay from the manufacturer to use it in that manner.
So it's not something that you just kind of want to take for granted and wing it.
Exactly right. Yeah, there are considerations when you install a hood. Certainly, you've got to be concerned about capturing all the fumes and the vapors, but also about makeup air back into the building to avoid a negative pressure situation. And there are other considerations in terms of how it will impact the ventilation system, or that in the case of natural ventilation, making sure that you have enough makeup air to comply with the code requirements and to avoid a situation where you might be drawing other products of combustion or harmful gases back into the space. So it's never quite as easy as it appears, at least in terms of the code requirements.
So as far as the safety question, I think we've nailed it down as far as you're concerned. Just don't use a propane tank inside, and if you're not sure if the piece of equipment that you're using is rated for using inside, go outside to the patio and warm yourself around the brew pot as it's brewing or boiling to be perfectly safe.
Yes, absolutely.
Now you've been kind enough to volunteer to or at least let yourself be subjected to more questions, and we've got a bunch from our listeners, and one comes from my buddy Steve Wilkes, who says, "What is the effect of outside air on the BTUs during the wintertime?" He was wondering, if you're brewing outside and it's 20 degrees. Versus if you're brewing outside and it's 100 degrees, are you getting more BTUs out of the propane burner, or the propane tank, in the summertime when it's hot?
That's a good question. Essentially, the answer to that is no. Propane contains a specified amount of BTUs, per pound. Let's go with that, and it burns and produces a certain amount of BTUs. However, depending on the surrounding environment and the heat transfer processes that are taking place, certainly in 100-degree weather, you're going to have a lot more efficient system. If you're trying to heat, let's say, a brewery kettle or whatever terminology you use, mm-hmm. It's going to be much easier to heat that kettle and keep it warmer than if it's 20 degrees outside, because while you're trying to heat the kettle, you're also losing heat, not only from the flames, but also from the kettle itself to the surrounding environment. So it's going to take more energy to maintain a specified temperature in the kettle when it's colder outside, because you have a natural transfer of heat from the kettle to the surroundings, which are at 20 degrees, and also the flames are cooling off as well, possibly before they reach the kettle. I'm trying to envision what this looks like, this system, and I may have the incorrect vision of this, but nonetheless, be assured that at 20 degrees Fahrenheit, it'll take more energy to keep that system at a specified temperature than it would at, say, 100 degrees Fahrenheit. But
the same amount of gas is coming out of the spigot, so to speak, at the two different temperatures, or is there a lower volume of gas coming out at the colder temperature?
Well, in the colder temperature, you've got a couple of things going on. Number one, you've got a system that is utilizing pressure regulators, and I'm going to surmise that the devices we're talking about here are burning propane at what we call 11 inches water column, which is roughly a half pound per square inch of pressure. But the density of that propane, because it's colder, it's more dense, and now that I think about it and reflect on it, you probably do have a slight increase in BTUs contained in the colder propane, just because it's colder and it's a denser gas. But I don't know how significant that would be. But you should have a fairly regular rate of burning, because you're regulated to 11 inches water column, whether it's 100 degrees out or 20 degrees out. As long as you're maintaining that pressure, it's going to be a fairly consistent BTU consumption rate. Again, but because the gas is colder at 20, you might have a few more BTUs than you normally would at a warmer temperature.
My assumption was that it was going to be different because there would be more pressure on the tank in the summertime to push the gas out. But if you've got a regulator there, it's going to cap it at a certain level, though.
Yes, that's correct. It'll cap at 11 inches. Now, the colder you get, the more difficult it becomes for the propane cylinder to vaporize the liquid inside the cylinder. So at high BTU rates, and we're talking, 35,000 BTUs, you may notice that you're losing pressure because as the liquid level in the cylinder goes down, you have you have less opportunity to vaporize that liquid. It gets colder quicker. And propane, when it reaches minus 44 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, it will be at ambient air pressure conditions. So you won't be able to squeeze any higher pressure out of that at minus 44. You won't be able to operate your appliance anymore. So I guess the message here is to try to work with a full propane tank, or as close to full as possible, because when it starts to get low, say less than a quarter liquid in the container, it becomes more and more difficult to vaporize that propane. And you can even see that in the summertime as well when you get a frost line on the container. If you're grilling or brewing or whatever, you'll see that the frost develops more quickly when the liquid level gets lower.
Yeah, that comes another question from Phoenix, Arizona. What causes tank freeze or ice on the bottom of the tank, and does it affect performance?
Well, I think I just described that. As the liquid level gets lower and you're trying to get as much heat into the container as possible to vaporize propane and continue to feed the system, that liquid gets colder, and as it approaches minus 44 degrees, the pressure drops down to pretty much zero gauge pressure, or atmospheric pressure can no longer supply fuel to the system. So even in warm climates, the lower the liquid level, the faster that liquid will cool down, and eventually you get to the point where it can no longer feed the system. And that's why you get that tank freeze, as he refers to.
All the more reason to have a spare.
Correct. Absolutely. Always have one on hand. Absolutely.
Jonathan from Atlanta says, can you get he's heard that you can get the most out of the tank by setting it on its side. Is that true?
Well, that is something you want to avoid doing. If you set the tank on its side, then you are actually feeding liquid into the system. And the problem with that is liquid has approximately 270 times the energy of vapor. The problem is that when you start feeding liquid into your line and that liquid begins to expand and vaporize, you have the potential for a release of propane, which could lead to a dangerous situation. So you never want to lay your tank on the side. You always want to make sure that the service valve is in contact with the vapor space, which, of course, the liquid will be on the bottom and the vapor will be on the top. So operate in that position. When you start to get liquid into the service valve, you run into all sorts of safety hazards, including the potential release of gas, and you certainly don't want that to happen.
Is there, Andy Sparks and Steve from Lansing, Michigan, ask, is there an easy way to calibrate how much gas is left in your tank?
Well, a lot of the cylinders do come with float gauges, but my understanding is that the accuracy of those gauges is not very precise at best. Probably the best way to calibrate it is to put it on a scale. Essentially, if you have the availability of a scale, and you can determine how much liquid is in the container, because every cylinder is marked with the tare weight of the container. And for a typical grill cylinder, that tare weight would be on the order, the tare weight includes the weight of the hose when they're filling it, so that probably wouldn't be a good gauge. But maybe the best way is to weigh your container when it's empty. Mm-hmm. You'll know how much it weighs, and then as you're operating the system, if you have the availability of a scale, you can put it on the scale and just simply subtract the weight at that particular time from the empty cylinder, and you'll know how many pounds are in there. Now, we refer to propane as filling it in terms of pounds. So what we used to call a 20-pound cylinder was what is used on grills. Now you typically get about 17 to 18 pounds in that cylinder because of the overfilling prevention device. So, if you've got, there's about 4.25 pounds per gallon of propane. So if you prefer to work in gallons, one of those cylinders holds approximately 5 gallons. But you can go either way, working in pounds or gallons. But typically we use pounds in the industry.
And again, another good reason to have a spare around so that if you do run out halfway during the boil, you're not running to the store to get some more.
Correct.
There are a couple of related questions. These kind of overlap, some of them. Dan from Buffalo and DJ from Denver. Dan says, can you turn up your burner too high and waste propane? And DJ says, what are ways to increase the burner efficiency? And to get a boil, should you just turn it all the way up? So, we're essentially boiling water is what we're doing. Is the best way to get it up to a boil just to crank it all the way open?
Well, I would probably say yeah. I mean, to put as much heat into that system as you could, and making sure, however, that the flames which are impinging on the liquid container, which is it a big kettle of some sort?
Yeah, essentially, it's a big kettle. It's a big either aluminum or stainless steel, or some use enamel. Just a big pot of water that we essentially add ingredients to, or we take the wort, the unfermented beer, out of the mash tun, and it's essentially just a big soup.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, make sure that the flames which are impinging on the kettle are not flaming out around the sides and stuff, because then you're not making efficient use of the burner.
Mm-hmm.
You want to make sure that all the flames and all the heat is going into the kettle as much as you can. I think it's better to heat it at maximum possible. That is, of course, without the licking flames around the sides, because then you're losing it. But the reason is because you're going to be losing heat as you're heating it. The sides of the kettle will be radiating heat. You'll be losing heat to the environment as well. So you've got to overcome those heat losses with more heat being put into the system to achieve the boiling temperature as quickly as possible and maintaining it. So I would say probably maximum use, maximum burner operation would be the best.
And Jeff Bearer asks, is there an optimal burner distance from the bottom of the pot?
Now, that one I'm not really sure about. Again, if you're too far away, you're going to be losing more heat to the surroundings. So I would say you'd want to be as close as possible to the pot, but if you'll look at the flame, you'll notice that the flame has different temperatures. If you can get, or I should say different colors, and each one of those colors represents a different temperature, you want to get the burner so that the deepest blue, which is the hottest part of the flame, the deepest blue, the tip of that blue on the upside is contacting the kettle. So you want to get the hottest part of the flame on the kettle, and that would be the part where it's the deepest blue color. But you don't want to squash it. You don't want to put the pot so close to the deep blue part that it's kind of squashing the flame. You want the natural shape of the blue plume to be touching the kettle at its tip. And this is just my own personal opinion. I haven't done any research in this area, but it seems to me that would be the most efficient use of that flame.
So you just want it licking the bottom of the pot there?
Yes, the deepest blue part licking the bottom of the pot, because that's the deepest blue is the hottest part of that flame.
Patrick from Baxter, Minnesota says, is it bad to have the flame jumping from the burner? Not sure what that means, but why do I seem to get the best flame when I block some of the intake?
Yeah, I think what he's describing there is the fuel-air mixture for the burner. Mm-hmm. And first of all, I have to say I'm not a burner expert, but what it sounds to me like is that he's putting too much fuel into the system, and the flame is jumping. It's not igniting at the burner tip because there's not enough oxygen for it to support and sustain combustion. And so that this plume of gas has to travel further away from the burner so it can mix with more oxygen and sustain combustion. So to me it sounds like he's got to maybe back off on some of the gas or allow more air in the premix to that burner. I don't know what kind of controls are available on these burners that you're talking about. If you're able to adjust the amount of air that's entrained in the gas before it gets to the burner tip, then you'll have to play around with that until you get just the right type of flame. You want to avoid yellow flames and that sort of thing, because then you're producing more carbon monoxide. You're not maximizing the efficiency of your fuel. Yellow flames are desirable if you're talking about a gas fireplace, because they're more aesthetically pleasing, and that's what you strive for. But in a situation where you're trying to utilize that heat in a system, you want to try for as blue a flame as possible, and certainly make sure the flame is coming right off the burner tip and it's not jumping or skipping, because then you've got a problem with your fuel-air mix.
Dan from Buffalo and Fire Brewer from Pennsylvania have similar questions. Dan says a slow burner takes longer. A slow burner meaning, I guess, fewer BTUs. It takes longer, but does it use the same amount of propane as a better burner does, heating it quicker? So if you have a burner that is lower BTUs, takes longer, you have one that has higher BTUs, takes a shorter time, they're both bringing the same amount of water up to the boil. Are they using the same amount of propane?
Well, honestly, that's a transient heat transfer problem that would take some analysis. I remember when my background is a mechanical engineer. I have a master's degree in mechanical engineering from the University of Illinois, but I harken back to the days in school, and there was a question about a cup of coffee, whether you would want to put the cream in first and let it sit, or wait a certain amount of time before you put the cream in. Would it be hotter? And unfortunately, that was so long ago, I can't recall the answer. But it would be a transient heat transfer problem that would take some analysis. I couldn't venture even a guess on that one without doing some work on that. So.
On the face of it, you would think that it would take the same amount of calories, so to speak, to bring a set amount of water up to boil, but there are other variables in there.
Well, sure, because while you're applying heat to the bottom of the kettle, you're also losing heat from the sides and from the top of the liquid. So the question is, how much are you losing over that time, the longer time frame on a slower burner? And how does that compare to a quicker burner that uses more heat at the start, but maybe doesn't lose the heat out the sides and the top as you would with a slower process. So it would just take some analysis, and I just don't have the answer to that one.
And Fire Brewer's question was what's more efficient, low pressure or high pressure? And that seemed to be essentially the same question. And a lot of it may depend on if it's windy or if it's cold outside, or
Oh, sure.
Lots of variables.
Absolutely. If you can avoid working on a windy day, you'll be much better off, because the wind will disrupt the flame. It'll carry the heat away, much of the heat before it even gets to the bottom of the kettle, from the flame. So a still air is much better for transferring heat into the system.
We're talking about BTUs, but Reverend Sleestacks from Buzzard Breath, Wyoming says, what is a BTU? He sees, you see them listed in catalogs and such as 50,000 BTU or 35,000 BTU, but what's a BTU?
Well, a BTU is a description of the amount of energy contained in a system. And you mentioned calories. Calories is another description, but the BTU stands for British Thermal Unit, and it is actually the amount of energy that it takes to raise a pound of water 1 degree Fahrenheit. And that was determined, many, many years ago. And that's the convention that was used in English units. If you're talking about, metric units, they typically use watts or joules. And then you mentioned calories. Calories is another unit of energy. So they all can be converted from one to the other. But the BTU is what we use typically in the United States for gas fuel appliances, because we're on the English system, as you know, and trying to go to metric system over many years, but it hasn't worked out too great.
Andy asks. Well, he asks what the minimum BTUs is on a burner, but that's not really your area of expertise. But he also asks, how does it compare with a gas stovetop? So if you've got a natural gas stovetop in your kitchen, what's the average BTU for an average size burner?
Well, I think you can kind of assume that you're talking about 10,000 BTUs per hour. And propane is used in residences as well for stoves.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Propane has more energy per cubic foot than natural gas does. A cubic foot of natural gas is typically 1,000 BTUs, and a cubic foot of propane vapor is 2,500. So you're talking about 2.5 times the energy. But in terms of transferring back and forth, you can convert appliances between natural gas and propane. You have to do some alterations to the controls and the orifices so that it's operated safely, but either one of those gases will work.
Yeah, Brad in Tulsa asks about converting from propane to natural gas. Can you assume that one will work with the other?
Yes, but again, in this case, you've got to check with the manufacturer of the appliance because he will let you know, or the manufacturer will let you know whether or not that appliance can be converted between propane and natural gas, and if so, what pieces have to be used to do that safely.
Jeff Bear has another question. Can you mix and match burners with regulators?
No, I don't think so. I think that the burner that you get with the appliance is matched to that regulator in terms of the BTUs that it can support, and also the pressure that you're talking about in terms of the burner's operation. So I would not say that would not be a good thing. You might wind up putting a higher pressure regulator with a lower BTU burner, and that would lead to some adverse consequences, I think, from the safety standpoint. So it's always best to use the manufacturer's equipment as it's delivered and shipped, rather than try to match and possibly lead to a safety situation.
And here's a hot one that you may not pass on. Craig Ballinger says the price of gasoline is down by 50%, but why not propane?
Well, actually, propane is tied to the price of oil, and of course there are all kinds of factors that go into it, depending on where you're located and where the propane is coming from, because propane is produced from both natural gas processing facilities as well as oil refineries. Any place you've got a pocket of oil, you've got natural gas, and you've got propane there as well as the other liquefied petroleum gases. So, yeah, unfortunately the pricing of propane is related to the price of oil, but there are many other factors involved. So, depending on where you are in the country, you could have higher or lower propane prices. It just depends. And
thinking about it, back in my high school chemistry class, the difference between propane and natural gas is a matter of the number of carbons in the chain. Is that right?
Yeah. Natural gas is typically, methane. It's 1 carbon atom and 4 hydrogen atoms. Propane is a little bit more dense. It's got 3 carbon atoms and 8 hydrogen atoms. So it's C3H8.
Well, I remembered something from high school. That's a good sign.
That's an accomplishment.
Now, the last question was the first question, and I think I've saved it for last because it's the silliest. But the first couple of people who answered my question was, are you going to be talking to Hank Hill? Do you get a lot of jokes about propane and propane accessories since King of the Hill came on?
Well, I'll tell you what. I think King of the Hill has probably been our greatest marketing tool because everybody's aware of it. And when it first came on the scene, of course, our organization was a little concerned because we were afraid that they would put a negative spin on propane and show a bunch of explosions and burnings and that sort of thing. But I think overall, it's been over the last however many years, maybe 10 years or so, it's been a net positive for our industry because it's made people aware of propane. And certainly I think there was only a couple of shows where they actually had folks getting hurt. So Yeah, Hank Hill has been a pretty good friend to the industry.
I would say nobody is a more adamant salesperson than Hank Hill for propane.
Yeah.
Well, Bruce, thank you so much for spending so much time with us. And I know that this is going to be, I predict that this is going to be a very popular show for future downloads, because this is very, very useful information that we get largely by rumor a lot of the time. So I appreciate your time.
Well, again, I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk to your fellow brewers. And if anybody has any further questions, they can contact me directly using my email address. So that'll be on your website. And thanks very much for this opportunity.
Well, thanks again to Bruce Swiecicki and the National Propane Gas Association. And I hope that answered a lot of your questions about propane and propane accessories. Bobby? I swear that's the last one. I can't help it. If that didn't answer your questions, I'll post a link to Bruce's email address in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. So what do you think? Is that going to change the way you brew with propane or use propane in general? So check out your equipment and check out whether you're using it properly. At least now you've got more information to help you brew more safely, I hope. Remember, everybody, we've got the Brewer's Logbook out there and our new Basic Winemaking Introduction to Wine Kits DVD out on our online store. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to James at basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from, and check your email address to make sure that I can get back to you. And if you email me, check your spam box to make sure that I haven't already answered you. Check out our low-tech lagering and decoction mashing DVD on basicbrewingshop.com, where you can see Steve do a single-step decoction mash, and follow me through a lager fermentation in the middle of summer, where I don't use a dedicated chest freezer. There are also original DVDs, Basic Brewing Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, and Basic Brewing Stepping into All Grain, where we take you through the all grain process. We got a new, well, they're not so new anymore. We got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy them more than one DVD at a time. And you can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. We've got shirts, different colors, and thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link. It helps if you read the same line and don't skip around. The featured products this week are Audio Quest LP Record Clean Brush. Cool. Somebody's digging into the old record collection. And Dr. Horrible's Sing-Along blog, which I saw when it was free on the web, and very cool, by the way. Thanks again, everybody, and remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We appreciate your support. That's all until next week. Thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio, and our website is provided by our buddy Kelly Dotson. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.